Hello, welcome to the Polyglot Files. My name is Michael, and in today's video we are talking about Scots. I made a TikTok recently where I said Frisian was the closest language to English linguistically, but in doing so I kind of made an offhanded comment about Scots, and it caused a little bit of controversy. Check it out. Did you know that the closest language to English is Frisian? Some will say that it is Scots, but there is debate as to whether or not Scots is a separate language from English, so let's dive into Frisian instead. I guess I probably should have known better than to make such a statement in the age of the internet. All the comments did make me want to dig deeper, however, and boy, was there a lot to unpack. I'm talking like a lot. First of all, I discovered heated arguments on both sides. There are those who think that Scots is definitely its own language, and those who think that Scots is just a politicized dialect of English. I also learned about the incident with the Scots Wikipedia, and let's just say that this is the biggest case of linguistic fraud that I've ever seen. We will explore all of that in this video, and then I, as a native Canadian English speaker, will read and listen to some Scots to see if I can understand it, to answer the question, is Scots really a separate language from English? Let's dive in. Right off the bat, I think it's important to distinguish what Scots actually is. When I say Scots, I'm not talking about Scottish Gaelic. That is definitely a separate language from English. It's not even in the same language family. I'm also not talking about Scottish English. Scottish English is a standardized dialect of British English that is used in the media and taught to children in schools in Scotland. Since we already know that Scottish Gaelic is a separate language completely, this video is talking about Scots, and we will look to see how it is different from Scottish English. Well, distinguishing Scots from Scottish English comes down to linguistic evolution. While Scottish English evolved out of early modern English, like other dialects of modern English in the 1700s, Scots did not. In fact, Scots evolved out of early Middle English about 600 years earlier in 1100 AD. Scots then existed concurrently alongside dialects of British English, Scottish English included. Scots is spoken by over 1.5 million people in Scotland. According to a 2011 census, about 1/3 of the Scottish population. Comparisons between English and Scots have been rife throughout the entire history of Scots. Because of this, Scots is often the topic of much debate. I know that that's what got me in hot water in my TikTok, and I stand by what I said. I'm not taking a side. I'm not saying it is a language or it isn't a language. I'm just saying there is debate about it. It's a neutral statement. Namely, the debate is Scots a separate language from English or is it a dialect of English? Whoa. Before you start typing, let's start with the arguments for why Scots is a separate language from English. What is a language and what is a dialect? It is the topic of much debate in the linguistic community and in academia. The truth is that there is no universally accepted criteria for determining what is a language and what is a dialect. There you go. You can stop watching the video now. It's really just up to you. But for argument's sake, in this debate there are generally two camps though. The first one says that linguistic distance and mutual intelligibility determines the line between a language and a dialect. The second side simply says that a language is a language if its speakers, and often its government, say it is. This is the case with Scots. Scots is recognized on an official level as an indigenous language of Scotland, as a vulnerable language by UNESCO, and as a regional language by the Council of Europe. 3 separate governing bodies say that it's a separate language. This is mostly because there is a distinct cultural identity and history that speakers of Scots all share. This identity, history, and way of speaking is distinct from other histories, identities, and ways of speaking, and in the eyes of Scots speakers, this is all that it needs to be a distinct language. Besides, there is a famous quote by Max Weinreich that says, "A language is a dialect with an army and a navy." While Scotland doesn't have its own distinct army and navy, the message is clear. Speakers of Scots have the social and political will to distinguish their way of speaking from other ways of speaking. Therefore, Scots, what they're speaking, is a separate, distinct language from all other languages simply because they say it is. In their eyes, case closed. Scots, being recognized as separate language by all the organizations that I mentioned in the previous section of this video, has its own Wikipedia. Makes sense, right? Well, champions of Scots often blame this Wikipedia for damaging Scots' reputation on the world stage and for fueling naysayers to claim that Scots is not a separate language from English at all. This all stems from a pretty interesting controversy that was uncovered in 2020. Let me explain. The Scots Wikipedia was established in June 2005, and by 2018, there were over 55,000 articles written in Scots. While the Scots Wikipedia should have been a great way to promote Scots as a distinct language, the quality of these articles were actually having the opposite effect. Take a look at this Scots article. From these articles, it was apparent to onlookers, often people who did not speak Scots, that the language used here was not really a separate language from English, it was just English with different spelling. Even prominent Scots speakers criticized the quality of the language being used in the articles. At best, the Scots Wikipedia was treated as a parody of the English language, but at worst, the articles were used as evidence that Scots wasn't a separate language from English at all. This all came to a head in August 2020 when real speakers of the Scots language and the Scottish media decided to look into why the quality of these articles were so bad and why they weren't an accurate representation of what Scots really was. What they found was shocking. An investigation uncovered that 23,000 articles, over a third of the entire Scots Wikipedia, was authored by one single writer. That author, it turns out, was not a Scots speaker at all. In fact, he was an American teenager who just decided to write Wikipedia articles in what he perceived to be a Scottish accent. In addition to his 23,000 original Scots articles, he had also edited some 200,000 other articles. After the investigation, all of the articles written by this American teenager were removed and they were rewritten by actual Scots speakers. By this point, however, all the damage had already been done. This whole situation had already negatively impacted the perception of English speakers who had logged on to the Scots Wikipedia just to see what all the fuss was about, read the articles, and thought, hey, this isn't a separate language at all, this is just English with different spelling. If you followed me this far in this video, and I do know that this is a long one, you can probably empathize with me when I say, what's real? We have governmental organizations saying that Scots is a separate language. We have an American teenager who has perhaps too much time on his hands, but on a linguistic level, is Scots actually a distinct language from English? Well, there are two ways we can answer this question from a linguistic standpoint. We have linguistic distance and we have mutual intelligibility. Linguistic distance is the measure of how far two languages are from one another based off of historical linguistics. For example, if you look at English and Arabic, we know that they're separate languages because of their linguistic distance. They are definitely part of different language families, and they definitely evolved out of different linguistic ancestors. That distance lets us know that they are completely separate. When you talk about Scots and linguistic distance, however, it's a little bit tricky. Scots evolved out of early Middle English around 600 years ago, and the two languages began to diverge. While this in and of itself is not a huge linguistic distance, the situation is further complicated by the fact that Scots was in constant contact with English throughout its entire evolution. It's not like Scots was on an isolated island and it was allowed to sort of evolve on its own without any contact with any other language whatsoever. In fact, the contact between Scots and English is so apparent that it's hard to distinguish if certain features of Scots are actually native to the variety or if those features come from the contact it had with English. Because it's fair to say that English has influenced the development of Scots. While linguistic distance is a murky criterion, so is the criterion of mutual intelligibility. Mutual intelligibility measures how much speakers of one language can understand another one. Generally, if speakers of language A can fully understand speakers of language B, we say that those languages are dialects of one another, but if they cannot understand each other at all, then they must be separate languages. Once again, if we look at the example of English and Arabic, it is safe to say that English speakers do not understand Arabic at all unless they've studied it. Therefore, English and Arabic are definitely separate languages. In terms of mutual intelligibility between Scots and English, there are no official studies or estimates that say just how mutually intelligible the two languages are. Anecdotally, throughout my own research, I encountered varying reports. Some say that the two languages are completely mutually intelligible, having mutual intelligibility perhaps as high as 90%. This last conclusion would then point to the idea that Scots is not actually a separate language from English on a linguistic level, but rather a dialect of English. Again, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just telling you what the argument is. Since my dive into the true mutual intelligibility between Scots and English didn't exactly make things any clearer, I've decided that I'm going to do a little linguistic test of my own. I want to see just how mutually intelligible Scots is with my dialect of English, Canadian English. To do so, I'm going to read an article in Scots and I'm going to listen to some spoken Scots. This Scots article is on the Scots Language Centre website. The title of the article is Luath Scots Learner. Luath? I don't know. I don't know what Luath means. Maybe it's a place? Anyway. It was 23 jaar Sina this coming month in April 2002 that the first Hale language course in the Scots laid in modern times was set forth. I will be very honest with you, I can understand all of that. The Luath Scots Learner, written by Lindsay Colin Wilson, Wiz, and is yet a handy work that has in tilt, things are now not so mutually intelligible, in tilt out the ordnar facts and artins anent the lead and who it gaze together. Wow. Okay, yeah, so first sentence was definitely pretty mutually intelligible. This one started off mutually intelligible. I could understand it, and then after that, I don't know what it's trying to say. At its original print, 346 pages, it has 25 lessons, along with instances twa way, crack through the lead, verb tables, advice on the grammar, and many eeks and ends to keep a body wrecked. Is that like German? But what makes this particular language course kenspekel is the way that Wilson sets the lead and hits cultural background with sundry articles anent the culture, history, leads, and modern identity o' the Scots folk, whither its meet and mote music or politics. Again, I feel like I understand most of it, and then I have these sections of words that I don't know what it means. Okay, now let's listen to this sample of spoken Scots. This is a lecture in Scots about the Scots language. I think it's like half an hour long. I'm not going to listen to all of it, but I'm just going to pick a random section and just see what I can understand.
The name Ingles was whiles used as an umbrella term for both the Southron and Scots leads.
Okay, English was used as an umbrella term for English and the Scots language.
This is a he'd historical spearers once to tack dente.
Okay, this was and then I didn't understand any of that.
When a chronicler speaks about Ingles or a text in Ingles, just what does it mean?
When somebody speaks about English or a text in English, what exactly does that mean?
Take, for instance, the description based on Andrew Keith in Sweden.
Take, for instance, the description based from this person in Sweden.
1578.
In 1570, echt, I'm assuming is 8.
Where he described reading a letter for the Regent Morton of Scotland.
When he described getting a letter from somebody in Scotland, I imagine that's an official title.
Clearly, in this context, the term Ingles can only mean the lead of Scotland.
Clearly, in this context, the word English can only mean the language of Scotland. Well, it seems like on a written and spoken level, I can understand about 70% of written and spoken Scots. I'm assuming that in both contexts, this is rather formal Scots. Maybe if I were in a Scottish pub in Edinburgh, I may have a harder time keeping up with conversation, especially if people are using a lot of slang or they're speaking rather quickly. So, what is Scots? Is it a separate language or is it a dialect of English? In reality, the conclusion is that Scots is a separate language on a political level, but whether it's a separate language on a linguistic level is up for debate. Scots is a separate language for those people who speak it. They get to decide if it's a separate language, and we have to respect that. Whether you decide to believe that is Anyway, I guess my video is being washed out by, oh, somebody's showering. In short, if you think Scots is a separate language than English, then it is. On an official governmental level, Scots is its own language. However, on a linguistic level, it may not be. Case closed. Anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. This has been our video about the Scots language. Please leave me a comment below. I'd love to know what you think, whether you speak Scots, whether you don't speak Scots. Leave me a comment and let's get juicy. You can also follow me on social media. I have a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a TikTok account where I make offhanded comments about things that turn into hour-long videos. I hope this is not an hour. I really do. As usual, thank you for watching the Polyglot Files, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!